you find subclinical thiamine deficiency to be a contributing factor in many chronic diseases? I know you've been talking about thiamine in a podcast episode, but would like to hear some more about your thoughts on thiamine from a chronic disease perspective. Also, do you think it is necessary to use any specific form of thiamine for different purposes? For example, blood sugar management, chronic fatigue, neurological issues, and pain management. Okay, so in terms of subclinical deficiency, is it common? Does it exist? Hard to answer because, as usual, most of the data that's clear is on severe deficiencies. But there are some studies. I wouldn't say there's a huge body of literature. There are some studies suggesting that even if you take a group of people who have some blood sugar issues and they are not thiamine deficient by classical standards, you can give them 100 milligrams of thiamine hydrochloride a day and their blood sugar improves. So I think that's pretty good evidence that there is widespread subclinical thiamine deficiency. And you can debate about the terminology, right? A lot of nutrition scientists and policymakers would object to using the word deficiency in that context. But the way that I see it is, if you do a study and you show that blood sugar improves with 100 milligrams of thiamine, unless you have a hypothesis about why 100 milligrams of thiamine hydrochloride would be acting pharmacologically rather than nutritionally, and by that I mean having some different effect at a higher than normal level, a supraphysiological level, that activates some biochemical pathway that is never activated at normal nutritional levels that could be obtained from food, right? So in that case, I would say the nutrients is acting pharmacologically, but if it's just acting on the pathways it always acts on, even at nutritional levels in food, and you took 100 milligrams of thiamine hydrochloride to make that happen, then I think the reasonable interpretation is the nutritional effect, that you probably did not need 100 milligrams of thiamine hydrochloride, but proof of principle you provided in that study, you went above and beyond whatever the actual amount of thiamine was necessary for those people. And who knows what that dose is, but it's a nutritional effect. And so in that case, I personally am comfortable with the terminology subclinical thiamine deficiency. Then I think that sums up my perspective on that. So I think subclinical thiamine deficiency is common from that perspective. In terms of different thiamine for different purposes, I just don't see the head-to-head studies that would be needed to really justify that. However, I do think that there are hypotheses that are plausible that suggest that neurological issues would be better treated with benfotiamine. But unless something came out in the last year that I haven't seen because I've been paying so much attention to COVID or something like that. Last I looked, there weren't, clear head-to-head randomized controlled trials subdividing different conditions that people are being treated for thiamine for. So my perspective is, it makes sense if you're dealing with a neurological issue, and I would put pain management in there. It makes sense to experiment for yourself to see whether benfotiamine might have a better effect. If you're not getting a response from thiamine hydrochloride, then I think it makes sense to hypothesize that you might do better with thiamine pyrophosphate, thiamine diphosphate, sometimes called, TPP. And that's, I think that's a real gray area, because conventional science would say that the TPP should be completely broken down to thiamine from inside the intestinal tract. But then again, there's recent science suggesting that 4-phosphopantothene, which is a form of vitamin B5, is absorbed from the intestinal tract intact and just slides through the membrane somehow. So I don't like to be dogmatic about that. And I'm really in the school of thought of, if cost saving is anywhere in your radar, start with thiamine hydrochloride, see if you get the response you want. But it would be reasonable to test your results against benfotiamine, especially for neurological issues, TPP, especially if you're not getting the results you want. So Marcus adds, from my own personal experience, I find benfotiamine to be very beneficial for blood sugar management, while allithiamine is more effective for neurological issues. Marcus, that's super interesting. In terms of mechanistically, I'm surprised that allithiamine would even be more useful than thiamine hydrochloride at all, in that it has traditionally been seen as like a damaged, basically a breakdown product of thiamine being damaged. But there's not sufficient clinical studies to disagree with anyone's personal experience. So I think this is very much in a trial and error era of thiamine understanding. Marcus adds, with thiamine hydrochloride, you need to use very high doses, upwards of 600 milligrams a day. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, I think your trial and error and personal experimentation is really useful. And there's not anything better than anecdote to go on with this. And generally I favor, with something like thiamine hydrochloride or allithiamine or benfotiamine that has like no risk profile, I think personal experimentation is great. The only downside to any of this, with the exception of some people who are sulfur intolerant and so have problems with high doses of sulfur containing nutrients, really the only downside of this is that you wasted some money on something that didn't work. So thank you for your question, Marcus.